This is this week's episode of Daniel's On Wax is On. Last week we talked a little bit of how we broke down self-defense, sport, and the high art. And we call it high, middle, and low. The high style, the middle style, and the low style. So we're going to talk about low style first. We're going to talk about self-defense because it's probably one of the most fractious and contentious aspects of martial arts, because we live in a modern world where, guns exist, pocket knives and folding knives and multi-tools and all exist and are carried around by a lot of people. And we are in America, we're a culture that isn't a weapons culture. We are a gun culture primarily. There is no real knife culture left in America. There are a couple of First Nations peoples that have some knife cultures, but they are understandably reluctant to share them. And that leaves essentially the only knife culture you find is, the prison knife culture. And because of that, a lot of martial arts, with their highly structured approach to weapons, a lot of it falls short in the modern world. In real self-defense, as we talked about last week, self-defense is about avoiding harm and life and death situations. So when you're really talking about self-defense, you're talking about things like, and warning, I'm going to say some trigger words here, you're talking about things like murder, you're talking about things like rape, you're talking about sexual assault, you're talking about domestic abuse. And these are the things that we talk about when we talk about self-defense. In my school, we don't talk about bar fights as self-defense. Bar fighting and that sort of thing is somewhere in between self-defense and sport. Most often, and I worked as a security for lots of clubs in Baltimore and DC in my misspent youth. And the altercations I got into there followed unofficial rules. Self-defense doesn't have any rules. But when I was security or doorman or whatever you want to call me, when I had to get in the middle of a fight, the bar fight was essentially consensual. Almost always both sides decided it was okay to fight and they went after it. Very rarely was somebody ambushed. Most of the time it was chat, 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 monkey dance, monkey dance, monkey dance, fire ourselves up, let's go at it. Okay, and that's consensual. That's not self-defense. That's halfway to sport. Okay, it's just sport without the codified rules, and so we don't consider that self-defense. And I teach self-defense that if you're in that fight, you need to find another school. You're not paying attention to me. We don't do that. We walk away. And if you're the kind of person that goes, well, I'm in that bar and this guy comes in and starts his stuff and I've got a God-given right to be in this bar, so I'm going to argue back. And if this guy makes it a problem, I'm going to take him down or I'm going to walk him outside. Well, I mean, no offense, but you're an idiot. Okay? In today's modern world, you're going to go in and start a fist fight with a guy. Remember, it's only halfway to consensual. You step outside and get in that fight and start winning. He could pull the pocket knife. He could go to his car and get the gun. It's just dumb to get into a bar fight in 2023. It's just stupid. Don't do it. So, when we're talking about self-defense, we're talking about things that tend to happen real close. And that's what leads me into one of the big things I have, the big problems I have with modern self-defense teaching today through martial arts, is we still act like people are going to act like what they did way back when. And they don't. They don't. And so in a self-defense situation, I always say for stand-up strikers, where we're primarily, in my school, primarily stand-up. We get into trapping and grappling in self-defense and even some groundwork because you have to. You're going to wind up on the ground eventually. Now, having said that, the whole 8 out of 10 times or 9 out of 10 times it goes to the ground is utter baloney. Okay? Because I was in dozens, if not hundreds, of altercations working for years. And I went to the ground once. Once. Let me say that again. Once I went to the ground. And the whole time I worked as security. Again, people would argue security is not the same as a self-defense situation, and I even agree with them. But when people say fights on the street, go to the ground, I say, well, I had a lot of fights on the street and only one went to the ground, because fights were over before they could take me to the ground. And that's not a bragging thing like I'm a tough guy. I had crew. There were 3 or 4 of us working. And then somebody would get into a fight with another person and I would put him in a choke. Fight was over. And we were standing. Okay? So the whole go to the ground thing, we kind of teach, don't go to the ground if you don't have to. You still have to teach it, because people are going to grab you, people are going to trap and grapple, and they're going to try to trip and throw, and you could wind up on the ground. And if you don't know how to wind up on the ground, that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy or that wrestler is going to eat your lunch. You're done. You're done. I'm done. Right? If a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu blue belt or black belt, take purple belt, whatever, takes me to the ground, even with what grappling experience I have, 51 years old, I'm probably done. I'm probably finished. Okay, so I don't want to go to the ground. And of course, in self-defense, there's no rules. So if we're trapping and grappling and we're going in and we're getting thrown to the ground, I'm putting fingers in eyes, I'm fish hooking mouths, I'm squeezing the throat, I'm punching the groin, I'm pulling my pocket knife because it's life or death, because I won't be in the fight if it's not life or death. So how do you train that? How do you train self-defense? The best, I think, self-defense instructors out there still often miss the mark, because they load you up with safety gear. They give you that marker knife where they go in and they say, you know, work the self-defense and look how you're grappling and you're going to have to do throws and trapping. Now you're going to go to the ground. And once you put on the safety gear, no one can hit you in the throat, and strikes to the groin aren't going to incapacitate you, and your eyes are protected with a shield. You've taken away, I think, the essential elements of what real self-defense fighting is all about, which is incapacitating your opponent as fast as you can. As fast as you can. I teach all the time, if you're punching in this area, that's great, but why aren't you punching here specifically? Why aren't you making it really hard for your opponent to breathe? And then people scream, because you'll go to jail. Well, in a life and death situation, maybe you will, maybe you won't. But if you punch somebody in the throat because they were standing at your spot at the bar, yes, you will. You're going to jail. But you're not supposed to fight for that. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about that overwhelming use of force, that person coming in, grabbing you, punching you, sucker punching you. Fight starting at the grappling range, not the kickboxing range. Self-defense doesn't start at the kickboxing range. At kickboxing range, when we're sitting feeling each other out with jabs and crosses, why are you even there? You should be running for the door. No one has grabbed you. No one has stopped you. You have room. Why aren't you leaving? See? So self-defense tends to start at this moment, at the grab, at the sucker punch, at the push, when you're making contact. That's where self-defense starts to happen. And that's where big basic rules of traditional martial arts fall flat on their face. You know, initial evasion, block first, never throw the first strike. You know what? In self-defense, the fight starts before they grab you, before that, right? The physical fight starts at a grab, but you should be well aware of what's happening before then. You should have situational awareness, environmental awareness. You should be using your assertive speaking. You should be using de-escalation techniques. And if it is a criminal attack that suckers you and comes after you, you basically have to rely on your situational and your environmental awareness. And if you don't have good situational and environmental awareness, you will get struck first. And one thing I discovered in my experience that has been backed up by studies, and you start watching the YouTube videos of the true self-defense gurus, the martial artists out there, and then the guys that are not martial artists that tend to do self-defense more with weapons and projectile weapons, which is kind of, I'm in the middle of those two. I'm a big fan of weapons, found weapons. I believe self-defense starts with force multipliers. That's why I carry a pocket knife on me and a multi-tool. I don't go around carrying a gun and everything like that because I believe it leads to trouble, but I do preach that if you're comfortable carrying one and you feel that you're in a dangerous situation, you should probably put it on. But you better have training. You better have not, and I don't mean a class where you plunked at a target. I mean you better have combat handgun training where you're going to shoot the wrong person. It's a very complicated subject, self-defense, because it's life and death, which means a whole lot more than wait for the person to strike first, be the good guy, subdue, restrain. I don't teach that for self-defense. If you're subduing and restraining, it's not life and death. If somebody comes at me with a knife, I gotta isolate, sure, if I can, but when it's time to strike that guy, I'm not using my sports stuff. I'm not punching him with hooks to the head and crosses to the nose and digs and uppercuts. I'm punching him in the throat. I'm sticking my fingers in his eyes. If I have time to pull out my force multiplier and get my knife out, I'm getting it out, and it's going in his inner thigh. It's going under the rib. It's life or death. And then I have to go and make my comments to the police. I have to get an attorney. I'm going to probably wind up in court at some point. It's going to be awful. So all the talk about stress testing and all the talk about have a good ground game and all the talk about all that stuff, very often to me it misses the entire point of self-defense, which is incapacitate them by any means possible, up to and including permanent. And then you got to deal with the aftermath of that. You've got to deal with what happens afterwards, because we are in a see if I get this word right, litigious society. And so there's a lot of talking and education that has to happen for self-defense, and not just a bunch of stress testing sport techniques in full safety gear, because that's not necessarily realistic. I think you'll find that if you watch the people who really care about self-defense and really try it and really are striving to find the best, that they'll get into those stress testing situations, and then they'll do something like gear up against somebody with a marking knife and realize that 20 to 30 seconds is a nightmare when you can't incapacitate that person permanently. Trying to fight and restrain somebody with a pocket knife when you're grappling in safety gear, you're probably going to lose. You're going to get cut up. So it's very real. And that's why I advocate stress testing. You've got to stress test, but you also have to realize you've got to train something along the lines of, I'm stress testing, but I'm also going to punch you in your throat in safety gear. And if you feel that significant blow, then we need to recognize that happened and maybe have a cease point. Like if I get a really good solid strike to your groin, maybe go, okay, that was an incapacitating blow and we can stop. Or I got that throat strike, or I was able to get in there and get to those eyes with my fingers, right? Because you got to train those. You can't just say, well, in the real world, if it ever happens, I'll go for the eyes. No, because if you're training wrestling and you're training grappling and you're not training incapacitating within that wrestling and grappling, you're not going to do it when it's for real. You're not, because as we all know, you do what you train. So eventually you have to train somehow safely with people you know and like. You have to train a process that would incapacitate and perhaps permanently maim or hurt another human being. And so that takes you a step further back to where a common complaint with my self-defense training is, why are we spending so much time with paper handouts? Why are we discussing de-escalation? Why do we spend all this time on assertive speaking when all you have to say is be loud and use assertive statements and not questions? Command and tell them that, because that's not enough assertive speaking. That's why. That's lip service. That's not real training. You know, de-escalation. You try to calm things down until it gets too high escalation, and then it's going to be a fight. Well, that's not even what de-escalation is. Like, if you don't even know the escalation and de-escalation process of a human being, you're just giving a lip service. You have to learn that. I had to go to school for that. I took courses in that. It's important. Situational awareness, environmental awareness. Those are not just words. You have to train it. How? Well, usually we play games, but the games teach you to look for things. Think about it. Be angry at me. It's okay. But I'll be more than happy to tell you more about what I mean in a little long-term format as compared to YouTube if you're interested. But that's where I stand on self-defense. And that's what I believe